And welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds, your top star/NHL podcast in Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. Thank you so much for supporting and listening to us this offseason. We're even getting great numbers in June. We have the NHL draft coming up. We have some trades happening as well as free agency. So a very interesting time to be a Stars and hockey fan. And, of course, we have Game 7 of the Stanley Cup that we're going to talk about today as well. Got a really interesting guest. Really enjoy his work. We're going to go north of the border. Connor Hrabchak, I was listening to his podcast today. He does a great podcast. It's called the Level Flight Winnipeg podcast. He covers the Jets for the Hockey Writer, also a content creator and contributor for Sports Talk Winnipeg. How are you, Connor?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me and the glowing introduction.
Yeah. My co-host Sean Shapiro always says, man, I try to be a good hype man for all the people that come on.
Well, you're doing a good job of it.
Well,
that's for
thanks,
sure.
Man. I enjoyed your podcast today. It was a great deep dive that you guys were doing on the Jets, and we'll get to that in a second. So you guys also talked about this and how your parents were getting involved in their feedback. And I wanted to know, because people wonder in the States, obviously there are 7 teams in the NHL north of the border, but everyone seems to think that Edmonton right now is Canada's team. Would that be the case?
That's honestly the dilemma up here. And I think it's dependent on the market. Like Winnipeg, for example, got owned by the Oilers in the 90s and the 80s and the Gretzky era. So a lot of people here that lived through that era hate the Oilers. They'll never root for the Oilers. It's like the Leafs and the Oilers are their 2 most hated teams just because they're Canadian teams, and once the Oilers own them and the Leafs get all the coverage, and that's those are the reasons. But for someone like me who's 21, didn't live through that era, like I find the Oilers super cool. Like I'm rooting for them. Connor McDavid is probably the best player I've ever seen in my lifetime. They're a Canadian team. A Canadian team hasn't won since I've been alive. Like, yeah. I think this is such a cool story. I think it depends on where you are in Canada. But I do think the general consensus is that the Oilers would be Canada's team, and people are sort of rooting for them a little bit just because it's been so long. I think if the Oilers win this year and then say 3 years from now, pick a random team like Ottawa was in the Stanley Cup Finals, I don't know if people would give them the same support just given that a Canadian team just won it and it's been so long. But I do think that there's a bit of a rally here from Canadians on the Oilers, and especially how they're doing it too with Game 7.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a tweet sent to me today from a Spits and Suds listener, David Kokis, and he asked if I thought poor conditioning by Dallas had anything to do with them looking flat in games 4 and 5 of the Western Conference Finals. And kind of my response is, I think Edmonton at times is making everyone look flat. Look what they've done to Florida the last 3 games.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, this series has, like, maybe game 1, Edmonton should have won if you really want to play that game, and Bobrovsky played great. But the other 2 games that Florida won, like, they were the better team. And then it just completely flipped. I don't know what happened, if complacency set in a Stanley Cup final, if that's even possible, but Edmonton has just completely dominated the last 3 games. It hasn't even been close. And Connor McDavid, yeah, I don't know if the extra day in between games is making it so that maybe these Oilers players that play a lot of minutes can get the rest they need and play even more minutes in these obviously must-win games. But I don't know. I don't know what it is, but they just look so much better than Florida right now, and it all comes down to Monday night. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the building will be buzzing, and it's great because it's turned out to be a great Stanley Cup. I mean, you know, you get depressed when your team's not in there, but it is fun from an objective perspective just watching hockey.
Oh, absolutely. And I was saying this earlier today as well. Like, I think if the Oilers come back and win this, this might be, again, I didn't live through the 90s and the Gretzky era and all that stuff, but I think, at least in my lifetime, this is the greatest individual Stanley Cup Finals performance ever that I've ever seen. If McDavid and the Oilers win in Game 7, like the way that they've done it, the way that McDavid has played 8 points in 2 games, the first time that's ever happened across a 2-game span in the finals. And then in Game 6, McDavid had no points. They didn't even need him, and they still beat them. What was it, 5-1 to force a Game 7? So it's been unbelievable. Just the McDavid show for Games 4 and 5, and then just the total team effort in Game 6 to set up this Game 7. But yeah, what, 1942, the last time a team in the finals came back 3-0 and won the series in the finals, and the Oilers can do it again. But I truly think that if the Oilers win, Connor McDavid is going to be in a special tier of not only like NHL history, but sports history.
Yeah, 42 points in this playoffs is just sick. I mean,
Unreal.
that's a great season.
Yeah.
Over 82 games for a lot of players.
Yeah, and Zach Hyman has like 70 goals now on the between the season and the playoffs, and Leon Draisaitl like was goalless and set up a really nice goal in game 6 to Warren Fogle to open the scoring, but he hasn't really gotten on the score sheet as much as you'd like, and I don't know, it's all been Connor McDavid, and in game 6 it was the rest of their team. It's unbelievable to watch how they've rallied here and forced a game 7, even gotten to this point, and now they have the chance to truly make history and do the unthinkable on Monday.
Did you think like I did when Zach Hyman got that breakaway goal that I thought to myself with that Montreal reporter, I said, wow, does he look at that and still think Hyman doesn't have any talent?
Yeah, I don't
I was wondering
that's a great
that.
question. I didn't think that in the moment, but now that you bring it up, that's a great question.
I mean, that was a sick move by Hyman. That was sick.
That was awesome. Yeah. And you don't get 70 goals between the regular season and the playoffs.
Yeah, I know.
Without working for it and without being incredibly talented. Yes, he plays with maybe the greatest hockey player ever and Connor McDavid, or maybe the most talented, but he still is doing unbelievable things. And the way he's able to kind of dominate the crease offensively is unlike anything we've seen from a player in a long time. He scored 50 goals in the regular season, and like 45 plus of them were all within 2 feet of the crease. So
yeah,
it's really ridiculous how he's able to just do that at will. And if it was so easy, everyone would do it.
You spend a lot of time looking at the Central Division. What were your thoughts on Dallas this year?
Dallas is really interesting to me because all season long, I thought they were the best team in the West. Going into the playoffs, I thought they were the best team in the West. They were my pick to win the cup. I had them beating Edmonton in the final. I thought they played well up until the final couple games of the series there. Yeah, maybe it looked like they ran out of gas. And then in game 6, definitely should have won, like tripled the Oilers' shots in that game. But again, the Oilers are 1 win away from the cup, so that doesn't really mean much as of right now. But you were asking me before we started recording, like what their needs might be. I genuinely don't know. From a Jets perspective, like Dallas was the team. They're the model of what other teams in the Central Division are looking to build. Like Colorado's built on star talent. They have McKinnon, they have Makar, Rantanen. That's not really how you're able to just build teams unless you just find generational talent, which is way easier said than done. But Dallas like has 3-4 forward lines that are contribute. They have Miro Heiskanen. They have the young players, Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stanko, and they have the goalie, Jake Oettinger. And then you have the star players, Rope Hintz and Jason Robertson. Like they truly had it all. And I think I've said this a few times as well. The Western Conference Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, like these series are kind of coming down to the fact of whether or not you have Connor McDavid on your team. And the Dallas didn't. Florida, they could win the final in game 7, but the fact that the Oilers have come back is because of Connor McDavid. And it reaches a point where Edmonton is good enough around McDavid to where he just pushes them over the top. And I think that's what happened to Dallas. But if I had to like label a need, I'm not really sure what it is. They were the deepest team by my count.
I think probably a need is re-signing Chris Tanev and the impact that he made. You know,
he was the best trade deadline acquisition for my money. He was fantastic for Dallas.
Yeah, absolutely. He was. So that'll be priority number 1. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Matt Duchene. Had a good year. Duchene admittedly said that the whole move from Nashville and 2 surgeries in the first 60 games, he was playing like a robot, and then it just kind of caught up to him. And it's hard to believe that a guy like Matt Duchene had only advanced to the second round once in his career. So to make it to the Western Conference Finals, and I just wonder if you're Matt Duchene, you've made over $100 million in your career. Do you just tell your agent, this is the place that I want to be. I want to stay in Dallas. I like it here. Let's try to get a 2 or 3 year contract.
Yeah, Matt Duchene as well. I thought I was really impressed with him and how he fit with Dallas, along with Tanev, who they added at the deadline. But again, like these are players. Tanev played what on the second pairing for Dallas. Duchene played on the second line, third line down the lineup. Like these aren't even their star players making these big impacts. And Jake Oettinger had a rough regular season, but then turned it around down the stretch into the playoffs. And a lot of like playoff success comes down to simply goaltending as well, where the Oilers in Game 6 against Dallas had the better goalie, Stuart Skinner, making 30 plus saves in that one. But I don't know. Like if I was analyzing the Dallas Stars and I had a Dallas Stars podcast, I genuinely would just be at a loss for words at where this team goes because they're so loaded. And
Yeah.
I felt like last year was the year. I picked them to win the cup. Like they didn't have a hole in their roster, and then they somehow lost because yeah, stuff happens, I guess.
I think if there's one thing that and I don't know if this is GM Jim Nill's style, and he's won GM of the year two years in a row, is I'd like them to get a little bit more physical. As the rink shrinks, I just feel as though teams know that they can deep forecheck without any consequences. They can be heavy against them. I'd like to see maybe a bigger fourth liner come in, as well as getting a little bit bigger defensively.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the formula that a lot of teams are trying to replicate right now, especially, the NHL draft is this week. You're going to see a lot of teams reach on, or maybe it's not a reach. Maybe in the end, it'll be the right pick, but I think you're going to see a lot of big defensemen bumped up boards. You're going to see a lot of big forwards, power forwards, bumped up draft boards and be taken a little bit early maybe than you would have expected, given that where the league's kind of going is these big yet talented players, like not just goons running around
Right.
all over the ice, but players that are, 6'4", but can actually handle the puck a little bit and can score goals and maybe score 20 goals for you and be an impact in the playoffs. And yeah, I think every team can get a little bit more physical, including Dallas, who, Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven led the way for them, like offensively in the playoffs, especially Wyatt Johnston. So and Robertson and Hintz, like I think they've got the skill part of things kind of down, along with Heiskanen on the back end. So maybe a little bit more physical, as most teams are.
Yeah, I agree. It's not the modern day where you need a guy that drops the gloves constantly. But I even look at Edmonton, and Mike McDavid's the story, but I don't know if they get as far as they do without some defensive stability with Ekholm in there. And he's really provided some great blue line strength.
Yeah, Ekholm and Bouchard, that pairing has been so good for Edmonton. And I'm really impressed with Evan Bouchard and how well he's played as well. And then Philip Broberg, just out of nowhere, being in a top four role here down the stretch after not playing all season long. They're Edmonton is weird because I don't think, you hear all the time that it's a copycat league. I don't think teams will be able to copy what Edmonton is doing. Maybe Vegas last year, but I thought Dallas this year was what Vegas was even this year and last year. That's why that series went 7 games in the first round. Like those teams were evenly matched. They're both deep. They both have good goalies. They both have strong blue lines. And they just don't really have any holes. But then Edmonton just rolls through everyone because they have the 3 best players on the ice at any given time in McDavid, Bouchard, and Draisaitl. Like it reaches a point where your team is so good, but you don't have the best player on the ice, and you just kind of have to shrug your shoulders, and that is what it is.
So when trade rumors came up regarding Patrick Laine, I said, boy, I have to get Connor on because from a Winnipeg perspective, he was drafted there, came through the system, had some successful years, was a Stars killer when he was in Winnipeg, as well as Connor. Tell me about the interesting player known as Patrick Laine and why it didn't work out in Winnipeg, and then why in Columbus it's just been even worse.
Yeah, I mean, not only is he one of the most polarizing players like in his career and everywhere he's been, but in Winnipeg, since the last 10 or so or 12 or so years that I've followed this team, he's probably the most polarizing player among the fan base. And like what your perception was of Patrick Laine was always the hot topic because he would score 40 plus goals a year for Winnipeg. That was he would be dominant on the power play. There would be flashes of great 5-on-5 play, but not really sustainable. And then defensively, he was lacking. There would be some clips floated out there where he's not back checking as hard as you would have liked. And the Winnipeg coaching staff here tried to mold him into a bit of a power forward when that's not really his game. So there was a lot of discussion around Patrick Laine in his time here in Winnipeg. And I can say that, I mean, his best hockey was played in Winnipeg when he was just used purely as a sniper, had some great playmakers on his line, Nikolai Ehlers, Paul Stastny at times, Brian Little. Those guys were setting him up, and he would just score 45 goals in his rookie season and his next season after that. He scored 40 plus both years. There was a lot of talk on Jets Twitter as well when Patrick Laine is apparently up for a trade. That fans want him to come back because when he was here, he was a fan favorite. Either you loved him or you hated him. And the majority of the fan base did love him when he was here. And he's looking for a fresh start. But the reason it didn't work out, that's an interesting question because I remember him requesting a trade. The Jets were, in and around the playoff line every year he was here. And this was going into the COVID year. And I remember he played one game, had a 3-point night, and then they traded him for Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think the next morning or the next night. And it was just kind of a shock. Like he did request a trade, but I wasn't really sure why he requested a trade at the time because, the Jets were a playoff team. Maybe it was a contract dispute that he was up for and then eventually signed with Columbus. But very polarizing player, great sniper when he's got playmakers on his line, will revamp your power play if it's struggling, but comes with a high price tag.
Yeah, and traded, like you said, for Pierre-Luc Dubois, who now just got traded from the LA Kings, didn't work out there, to the Washington Capitals, trying once again to get the max out of the player. What was Winnipeg like with Pierre-Luc Dubois?
Dubois, it was kind of a victory lap week around here in Winnipeg as he got traded once again. Because Kevin Cheveldayoff did so well on that deal in return, getting Gabriel Velarde, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kapari, and a second-round pick, which is the Jets' highest pick in the draft on Friday. I guess Saturday they'll be making that pick. But either way, Pierre-Luc Dubois never really worked out here in Winnipeg. Again, it was the COVID year and the year after that. He was always a second-line center, never really found his footing here. Another really polarizing player, as one side of the fan base saw the fact that he's a 6'3", 220-pound center that can occasionally play with an edge and have this physical nature to his game. And then the other side is that clip that went viral when he was in Columbus, where he's just kind of coasting around, looks lost on the ice. Like there's two sides to Pierre-Luc Dubois' game, and when he's on, he is a top 6 center in the NHL. But more often than not in the regular season, he's not on, and that's where your statement there comes into play. Washington is just hoping to get the right version of Pierre-Luc Dubois.
So you had big news today with your top overall pick in 2022, Rutger McGroarty out of University of Michigan, asking for a trade. Hasn't been in Winnipeg yet, but is worried, from what I was listening from your podcast, concerns about development. And yes, I find that interesting as the draft is nearing. What can Winnipeg get? And I'm sure if you're Cheveldayoff, you don't like the fact that this came out because you might lose a little bit of bargaining power. However, the player himself is a good one, and I'm thinking some teams might be calling Winnipeg regarding this.
Yeah, so the first report was Elliot Friedman, who 32 Thoughts, his podcast, he reported that McGroarty was coming up in trade talks. And then later that day, Murat Atesh from The Athletic reported that it's actually likely that McGroarty gets traded. There's kind of an impasse on how McGroarty views his future and how the Jets view his future. A lot of people are speculating that he went back to Michigan, or he committed to Michigan for his senior season. A lot of people speculating that the Jets maybe told him, yeah, you could come over, but you'll probably be in the AHL. So he said, screw this, I'm going back to Michigan. And now he's like, he sees what Cole Perfetti went through this season, where he was in and out of the lineup, didn't play in the playoffs except for the last game. Ville Heinola, another first-round pick for Winnipeg, hasn't played for the Jets for an extended period in his entire career. He's approaching 23 years old. So he's seeing all these young players sort of not getting chances and saying, well, I don't want to be on an organization that's going to bring me over, have me play in the AHL for 2 years, and then finally bring me in. I want to play in the NHL right now. And he has every right to do that. So the Jets now have to explore a trade or kind of salvage this relationship. And I think it's too early to tell where this is going to go. Murat Atesh from The Athletic, the the way he saw this situation playing out is that a trade will happen before the draft on Friday, which is very quick. But this, yeah, very shocking news for the Jets' top forward prospect, Rucker McGrory, who's been killing it with Michigan the last 2 years, and just came off of a fantastic season, putting up a ton of points. And now I'm not sure if requesting a trade is the right terminology, but definitely exploring his options, let's say.
How about pick number 29, and we'll even throw Nils Lundqvist in for you.
The Jets are looking for a young top four right-handed defenseman. I can tell you that because there's Dylan DeMello's a UFA. Neil Pionk's got 1 year left on his deal. He struggled as well last season. Outside of that, there's really no top four defensemen in the wings for Winnipeg. I know Elias Salomonson, a lot of people are excited about him, but I wouldn't bet on him playing top 4 minutes next year. So if you have a right-handed defenseman, Winnipeg, that's what they're looking for, I'd think.
Okay, you had a big coaching change as well. Rick Bowness decides to hang up the boots. He did that in Dallas as well, and then he showed up in Winnipeg, and I don't know if Bones will ever show up again, but went to Winnipeg. It seemed from an outside perspective that the locker room kind of calmed down and got a lot out of that team. What did you think of the recent coaching changes?
Yeah, Rick Bowness, I mean, he and his wife, Judy Bowness, went through a few health issues throughout the season. So this wasn't really a shock that he stepped away and retired. He's coached for a long time in the NHL. I think he had the most games coached between being an assistant and a head coach in NHL history. Don't quote me on that. I believe I'm correct. But anyways, he was here for a long time, 2 years, and really reshaped the culture and the locker room. And now Scott Arniel, his assistant's going to step in. And Rick Bowness, in the end, did exactly what he was supposed to do here. He brought the team to the playoffs 2 years in a row. Yes, some disappointing results in the playoffs, but during that time, he also named Adam Lowry the captain, reshaped the culture, brought a winning culture, at least in the regular season, here to Winnipeg. And now the expectation is that they're going to be a playoff team year in and year out, which you couldn't really say when Rick Bowness wasn't here. So I thought he did a great job over the past 2 years as head coach of the Jets. And then Scott Arniel. His first presser was a good sign, let's say. He preached analytics a lot and the development of youth, which, I don't know, Rucker McGrory might want to have a conversation with Scott Arniel now that this is all coming out. But a lot to discuss there with Scott Arniel because he was on the coaching staff last year. A lot of people are saying, well, it's not really a new voice. So he's going to have to prove himself. And the first 15 to 20 games of the upcoming season are going to be really important for him.
Couple of free agents that have Stars ties, former Stars defenseman Brendan Dillon and Colin Miller are free agents. Are you looking at them coming back in Winnipeg?
I would love for Brendan Dillon to come back. That one is more of a question mark than Colin Miller. I think Colin Miller is going to test free agency. He's got a chance. He's, I believe, still around his 30s, so he's got a chance to get a longer term deal if he wants, playing a depth role somewhere else. So I think he's going to move on. Brendan Dillon, that one's a little bit more 50-50. 34 years old, has been great for the Jets over the past 2 seasons. On that second pairing with Neil Pionk in a shutdown defensive role, he's been great. Physical leader. The fans absolutely love him. He had a career high in goals last year with 8. This deep into his career, had 8 goals. And he was really great for the Jets. And I think if they're able to bring him back at a cheaper price tag, maybe play him on the third pairing going forward, they'll be all over that. But the same role, same money for Brendan Dillon, I don't think will be possible given the cap space the Jets have, which isn't much.
1 year left for Nikolai Ehlers of the Jets. A good year, 61 points, $6 million price tag. Do you see Cheveldayoff maybe shopping him around or maybe looking to sign him to a long-term deal?
Yeah, this is another massive question mark and kind of compiled with the McGrory news. Like there's a lot going on here in Jets land, but Nikolai Ehlers, his whole career, he's been on the second line here in Winnipeg. He's been given chances on the top line, and when he's up there, he's been fantastic. The Jets actually broke a franchise record winning streak when he was on the top line with Scheifele and Velarde in the middle of December. He was at the center of it all. He was playing fantastic. And then Kyle Connor came back from injury and Nikolai Ehlers got demoted. And it's like a tale old as time here in Winnipeg that Kyle Connor's on the top line, Nikolai Ehlers is on the second line. But when you look deeper into the numbers, flipping the two would actually be more beneficial. Or when they do, it's more beneficial, let's say. But he might feel disrespected by that. He might feel that he is a top line player because he's proven when he's on the top line, he can put up those major points. He finally had a fully healthy season as well. Like you said, 61 points in 82 games played. Um, I could see him requesting a trade and not wanting to extend with the Jets. But as this situation goes on, I could more and more see the Jets bringing him into training camp, even without a contract extension, much like they did last year with Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck. And then a week before the season started, they signed both of those guys to long-term extensions. But if they're not getting an offer they don't like, Kevin Cheveldayoff is notoriously patient. He's going to wait. And the truth is, with Nikolai Ehlers, they can wait all the way to the trade deadline if he doesn't want to extend.
I've used Connor Hellebuyck as an example here because Jake Oettinger, a lot of people thought, and it was a down year for Jake Oettinger, did face some injuries, but I told them to look at Connor Hellebuyck pre-COVID, and he had that one tough year, and then he resurrected himself as what I think is the best goalie in the world, easily top 3. I have him as my Vezina winner this year. What did anything change with Connor Hellebuyck, or is that just a situation where sometimes goalies have down years? Because looking at that, it was like, okay, you're looking at the greatest goalie right now playing, and Oettinger can kind of have that bounce back year. Where do you have Jake Oettinger as far as goalies in the NHL?
Yeah, Jake Oettinger, I feel like his reputation is up there as a top 10 goaltender, and a lot of that comes from his performance in that series against Calgary that they lost a few years ago. And then down the stretch this year, he played great, but for my money, down the stretch in the regular season and into the playoffs. So his reputation there, I think, puts him within the top 10 just on like talent alone. Connor Hellebuyck is an interesting study because he's been great his whole career, but now at 31 years old, he's having the best season of his career, and he's such a technical goaltender. He's not the goalie that when he's out of position, he's going to sprawl back and make a massive save. He's the type of goalie where at the end of the night, you're going to look and he's going to have 37 saves and you're not going to remember any of them because he's just in position. The puck hits him in the chest, and that's that. He's the best positional goaltender in the league, and I think that bodes well for his longevity. But the defensive structure this year was miles improved from the past couple seasons. That's a large testament to Rick Bowness as well. And that really helped Connor Hellebuyck not only see less shots, but be more efficient. And for my money, should be the unanimous Vezina winner when you look at the numbers. By far the best goalie in the league this year. And doing it at 31 years old, not typically what you see. You usually see goaltenders have their best year at 26, 27,
Yep.
Right when their prime begins. But yeah, Connor Hellebuyck, I think he's going to take home his second Vezina, and I wouldn't be shocked if it's unanimous as well.
I don't know if you've mentioned them yet, but in the Central Division, one team that I have my eye on is Utah, because I feel as though the money now is there. The splash needs to be there in Salt Lake. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of hype. I think the owner wants to make an impact and make an impact quick. They have some really good young defensemen, and they have some good young forwards. They need a goaltender, but that's kind of an interesting team if they can put a couple of parts together, possibly contending for that second wild card position.
Yeah, Utah's very interesting. They're a spot that I actually outlined in one of my articles for Nikolai Ehlers, a player that, new market, a dynamic, like fast winger that puts up points. Like he could be an exciting player that they could go out and get. And Utah has a lot of draft capital, which the Jets do not. They traded their first for Sean Monahan. They traded their second and their third for Tyler Toffoli. And I could see them making a move for Nikolai Ehlers to help out their forward core, which is young and up and coming, but make it a little bit more exciting and give the fans something to cheer about night in and night out. I could totally see them making a splash of some kind. And if I'm not mistaken, they have like $45 million in cap space.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, absolutely. The guy that I would go after that's actively playing for Utah, Michael Kesselring. I really like him defensively.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Are they the team that doesn't have a defenseman technically under contract, or is that someone else?
I'll have to check. By the way, we're all depressed that cap friendly's going away.
Oh yeah. As we both click over to Cap Friendly, let's just say our goodbyes.
I can't. I have a reminder on my like print all NHL salaries before the NHL draft.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Well,
I mean,
I'm on Cap Friendly
okay,
here, and they don't have a defenseman under contract. They have three RFAs: Sean Dursey, JJ
yeah,
Moser, Juuso Valimaki, and then two UFAs: Joshua Brown, Travis Durbett. But like they don't have a defenseman signed is the point. So maybe there's a Jets defenseman, a veteran, a Neil Pionk. Maybe the Jets want to retain some salary and give them Nate Schmidt for a pick, just to have some warm bodies on their blue line. But I think Utah is one of the most intriguing teams to me because they can do a lot of damage and actually push for the playoffs this year. Like you said, for that second wildcard spot, they're a young and up and coming team. They have a ton of cap space, a ton of picks. Like they're, I think, kind of all eyes are on them as the newest team, and like with all this cap space, all these picks, all these young players, they can do a lot. And I'm really interested to see what ends up happening there.
yeah. I'm interested in the division as well. Obviously, the Stars will be in it. The Avs will be in it. Let's see if Winnipeg can slide into that third slot. Nashville, I thought, had a pretty good year. Came on strong. Blues, kind of up and coming, but probably some parts away. Just a really, really interesting, and thank goodness the Chicago Blackhawks did not get the top pick again. That would have been tough.
Well, yeah, like Celebrini and Bedard would have just been the next Taves and Kane. Like it would have just started all over again.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. Absolutely. My friend, you're an absolute beast. Can't wait to have you on again. You are terrific as advertised. Connor Hrabchak. Let me try to play hype man again. So the podcast that you need to listen to, and I tell this to Stars fans because thank you so much for listening to Spits and Suds. And we really try to give you a Stars perspective. But one of the reasons that we have Connor on today is from an outsider's perspective. And listening to Connor today with his partner talk on his podcast, I was learning a lot about the Jets and getting some intel. So you want to listen. It's called the Level Flight Winnipeg podcast. You can find it wherever podcasts are found. He's also the Winnipeg Jets writer for the Hockey Writer and also a contributor to Sports Talk Winnipeg. And now a contributor to Spits and Suds. You're a beast, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was nice to be on and provide my Stars perspective. I know maybe I'm not the expert that everyone was looking for, but I do keep up with the Stars, and again, they're loaded. I think they're going to be the top team in the Central again next year, and I'm sure Stars fans love to hear that.
Well, one of the things that we learned as Stars fans, because people ask us down here, what is the Stars' biggest rival? And I'm honestly don't know. And part of its location, we would have to probably say, and I think The Athletic did something where they ask fans, and it most likely is Winnipeg. I'm sorry, most likely is Minnesota. But then I asked Joe O'Donnell, good friend, play-by-play announcer for the Wild, and he said, sure. He's like, that makes sense because they moved to Dallas, but with all due respect, rivalry time is when Winnipeg and Minnesota square off.
Yes. Yeah. Winnipeg, Minnesota games get wild. Pun intended. They get wild. They get wild sometimes. There's a lot of fighting, a lot of hits, a lot of like suspension worthy things that come out of it as well. Like a lot of controversy, let's say. For Dallas, is Vegas, like from an outside perspective, I would say Vegas, given the fact that they've played each other a few times, like recent memory.
Yeah.
Biggest rival, Vegas.
Yeah, I would say that Vegas, and then you could have said it a couple of years ago, Nashville, based on the Stars taking out the Preds in the playoffs and then having the Winter Classic against the Preds the following year. But there just hasn't been, and like I said, part of its location, very tough. If Houston gets a team, it's on. But right now,
for sure.
Vegas is a great pick. So it would either be Vegas or Minnesota. I don't know. I mean, I guess all teams are rivals. Let's just say that.
Let's just say that. And the Jets and Wild, that's purely like geographical. Like both teams can, or both fan bases can go up and down. It's an 8-hour drive and watch their road team. I know a lot of Jets fans that do make the trip every year down to Minnie. And they play them once or twice every year down there. So it's an easy trip. I hope that the Wild and the Jets get like a Heritage Classic or a Winter Classic here in the near future, especially with how crazy their games have been.
Yeah.
It feels like they're playoff style games in the middle of January. It just like makes no sense, but it's so much fun to look forward to. And I hope that NHL maybe sees that and puts two of the smaller markets in a big game. I know it's a tall ask for Winnipeg to get like a Winter Classic, but I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, they could definitely get a stadium series. But you're
Yes,
right.
yeah.
I would definitely watch that game. And one thing that I love about this year's Stanley Cup final is that the ratings are doing well. And those
Yes.
are not popular markets. So therefore,
Florida.
yeah. I mean, you have one that's not even in the United States. So for the U.S. ratings to be up for the Stanley Cup, I think that says a lot. Granted, you have the LeBron James of hockey. You have Connor McDavid, a lot of excitement. But, yeah, the other thing that we didn't even touch on is I got to go back to the 1 versus 8. I got to go back to that. I'm not a fan of this division thing. I mean, I understand it, but man, some of these teams I just felt like got a raw deal this year. I mean, if you're Tampa, and I mean, granted they finished in the wild card, but that's a tough draw. Dallas getting Vegas in the first round was a tough draw. I mean, that's one of the things, like, we talked earlier on the pod about the Stars possibly getting worn out. Well, I mean, it could be there when you look at you took out 2 defending Stanley Cup champions, Vegas last year and Colorado the year prior. That's not easy. So by the time you got to Edmonton, you could have been tired.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of the going back to the 1 through 8 playoff seeding. I just looked now. Winnipeg would have played LA in the first round, which I think they would have fared a lot better against LA than they did against Colorado. That's not saying much. But I'm a big fan of that as well. Like, I know they're trying to create rivalries and through that, but I just think there's too much of a mismatch on which teams are playing who. There's these juggernaut series where Dallas plays Vegas, and it's like, all right, whichever team wins that series, I think is the favorite in the West.
Yeah.
And then you look over and like Vancouver's playing Nashville, and no disrespect to those two teams, but I didn't ever think that either of those two teams would be a Stanley Cup favorite in the West. Never mind when Thatcher Demko went down. Then I mean, Artur Silovs came in and played great, but the Canucks and Predators should never be a first round matchup when that's the case. But I don't know. Does it change much? Colorado Edmonton would have been a first round matchup given the 1 versus 8. That would have been super cool. Like, I think I'm a big fan of that, and they got to go back to it soon.
Yeah, I agree. At Connor Hrabchak 1. Was there another Connor Hrabchak?
Yeah, I think I made an account and then like screwed it up and got locked out or something. So then I had to make another one.
Okay. At Connor Hrabchak 1 on Twitter. When we tweet out this podcast, we'll tag him as well. You're a beast, Connor. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks again for listening, Stars fans, to another edition of Spits and Suds. We'll be back with another edition. As I mentioned, we have the draft coming up. We have trades that are happening. We'll always pop on for you like we did last week when Ty Dellandrea was traded. We'll be there for you. It's Spits and Suds right here on 105.3 The Fan. Have a great day, everyone.